Dr. Joshua Loth Liebman, author of Peace of Mind, meets Dr. Richard H. Hoffmann, the Reverend Dr. Carl Heath Koff, and John K M McCaffery in The Author Meets the Critics. And here's your regular chairman, the associate editor of American Magazine, John McCaffery.
The Book of the Month Club, your host on these programs, brings you The Author Meets the Critics every week so that you can have an acquaintance with the books you've been hearing so much about. We'd like you to meet the authors, and we want you to be introduced to the critics. And after the author meets his critics face-to-face, we hope you can make up your own mind whether or not you're interested in the book under discussion. Our guest author tonight is Dr. Joshua Loth Liebman. His book, Peace of Mind, is one of the leading bestsellers throughout the country, and it has created controversy everywhere. Our critics this evening have different points of view about Dr. Liebman's book. First, we will hear from Dr. Carl Heath Koff, the leading Congregationalist minister in New England, author of the recently published Personal Crisis. Dr. Koff, how do you feel about Peace of Mind by Joshua Loth Liebman?
I read this book when it came in manuscript to my desk, and at first I thought it was tackling an impossible subject, trying to align religion and psychiatry. But the more I read it, and the more I have seen other people reading it, the more I have decided that I know of no book outside of the Bible which will do so much to help people stabilize their emotions and their intellectual life and their frustrated desires and hopes in a world which very often seems full of despair. That's the way I feel about this book.
Well, no one could feel more about it than you evidently do, Dr. Koff. Now we have the well-known neuropsychiatrist, Dr. Richard Hoffmann. Dr. Hoffmann, how do you feel about Peace of Mind by Joshua Loth Liebman?
First of all, let me say that I think it's rather a difficult task to take a canvas as broad as the one that Dr. Liebman has covered and submit it to the tintype of criticism. It's a difficult thing to do. However, I feel that Dr. Liebman, in attempting to show the consanguinity between science and religion, where everyone else has heretofore shown the conflict between the two, has opened the door somewhat to air the room of superstition and bigotry and ignorance. I think, however, that he's just opened it enough to let in a draft. I wish he had opened it widely and let it blow in to the point where we could have achieved the destruction of bigotry, superstition, and ignorance. How far he has achieved, I think we'll find out as we go along with our discussion.
Nothing could delight me more than what you have said, Dr. Kopp, and what you have said, Dr. Hoffmann. I disagree heartily with both of you. Well, the lines are drawn, but before we do battle on tonight's book, here's our announcer.
Before the proceedings start, here's an item of news that will surely be of considerable interest to you book readers who listen to this program. The current book of the month, the July choice, will be published next Tuesday. It's called Britannia Muse, and it's by a novelist for whom you probably have a soft spot in your heart, Marjorie Sharp. You may remember the novel that made her American reputation 10 years ago, The Nutmeg Tree, and her delightful and hilarious Clooney Brown, also a Book of the Month Club choice, by the way, 2 years ago. That book, as you know, is now appearing in a movie version, and yesterday's papers announced that Britannia Muse also has now been snapped up by Hollywood for one of its fantastic sums, with very good reason, we can assure you. The heroine of Britannia Muse is again one of those highly individualistic ladies that Marjorie Sharp excels in inventing. John Marquand, one of the Book of the Month Club's 5 judges, in a pre-publication report to club members, described Britannia Muse, and I quote, as a blessed and reassuring relief after recent powerful literary roughage. There's not a dull or turgid moment in it. The Book of the Month Club commends the book to you warmly, whether or not you're a member. Get it from some bookstore if you're not a member of the club. But have a good time. Don't miss it.
Let's now turn to the book of the evening, Peace of Mind by Dr. Joshua Loth Liebman. Dr. Hoffmann, suppose you state the thesis of this book as you understand it, and according to Dr. Liebman, you understand it imperfectly, I'm sure, for the benefit of those who have not read it.
Well, first let me say that when I first got the book about 6 weeks ago, I was about halfway through it. When I gave it to a depressed patient of mine, he never came back.
That can be either good or bad, Dr. Hoffmann.
Well, but that was not the reason that I have anything to say against the book. Because...
Well, a fee's a fee, after all.
Well, after all, it depends upon how difficult it is to earn it, but I don't know how feasible it is. However, I thought that I had gotten to that particular point in life when I had a certain amount of peace of mind. When I read this book, I lost it. I got something much better. I got restlessness of mind. I think that's the only thing worthwhile, because peace of mind is not something we acquire, it's something we attain. Restlessness of mind is the only thing worthwhile, because it's through restlessness that you work, that you achieve, that you conquer. Nothing would have happened if it hadn't been for the restlessness of the human mind. So that I believe that this book called Peace of Mind is something that is, as he says in the book, partial suicide. Personally, I don't want it.
Well, after all, Dr. Hoffman, restlessness could just come from antediluvian underwear, too. I mean, I think that Dr. Liebman makes a little bigger point of peace of mind, perhaps, than you've indicated. But, Dr. Kopp, what about you?
Well, it seems to me that the kind of peace of mind we're talking about is some reconciliation between the tensions that all of us feel. There's this tension of the desire for the good, and there's the tendency toward the possibility of evil. You know that description of a British Tommy that's given in a poem of Studdert Kennedy's. It goes like this. The Padre says I'm a sinner, but John Bull says I'm a saint, but the truth of it is I'm neither. I'm neither of them, I ain't. I'm a man. And a man's a mixture, right down from his very birth. And part of him comes from heaven, and part of him comes from earth. And the consequence is he wobbles twixt muck and a golden crown. Now that's the tension that this book is trying to resolve, the tension between our tendency downhill and our desire to go uphill. And if you don't have a little of each of those, you're not for this world, you're in another world. Now, peace of mind is simply an attempt to reconcile those two possibilities within us, the possibility of infinite good and the possibility of tragic evil. And you only have to look at some of your friends or enemies to see how low they can go. And you have only to look at some of your own desires and see how low they may go. And when you fall that low, you don't have peace of mind.
Well, this thing is now embarrassing me personally, Doctor, so I'm going to get back to Dr. Hoffman and ask, what do you think of the nomenclature which is being used here, Dr. Hoffman, this ultimate good and complete evil which Dr. Kopp is speaking about? Do those terms have any relevance for you?
Yes, I think those are words that are made to conceal thought. Dr. Liebman is possessed of a very grandiloquent vocabulary in this book, and some of his thoughts are sent to a metaphoric masquerade ball where I myself failed to recognize some of my best friends. However, to be serious for a moment, he has attempted something. I'll say this. I think he's been psychoanalyzed. I don't think he got enough out of his training in Cincinnati to make him satisfied with his viewpoint of the world. He wanted wider vistas. And when he was psychoanalyzed, he got something that he didn't know before. He got some acquaintanceship of that conflict between the conscious and the unconscious, which broadened his horizon of consciousness. And then he began to think. He saw a great many people who failed when they were submitted merely to faith. He saw a great many other people who were helped by submitting to reason. And then he wanted to correlate both. Now, he went into this thing like William Tell with two arrows. He was going to shoot tradition. What? That apple of ignorance from the Charlie McCarthy of what he himself calls fumbling humanity. And if he missed, if the book were a failure, you could always say to the people in Cincinnati, well, I still said there was a God, and he was a great God and a good God. Now, he didn't have the courage to come in with one arrow and say the whole thing. The fool has said in his heart there is no God. You can't be without religion no more than you can be without sensation, unless you're born paralyzed and then you die. Religion is an emotion. Now, he added to that the wisdom of an engrossing and enlarging reason. There are only two sources of conflict in life. One is not being able to get something you want, and the other is not being able to get rid of something you don't want. When you've said that, you've said almost all you've got to say. Now, the good doctor broadens this.
The good doctor is the distinction you're making here, Dr. Hoffman?
Yes, it's a great distinction. He's a very good doctor. The good doctor reveals himself. I don't think he's completed the psychoanalysis. I'd like to have a couple of shots at him.
How much will it cost him?
Nothing.
Take him up, Dr. Liebman. That's the first time in history that a psychoanalyst has said it would cost anybody
nothing. I'm not
nothing.
a psychoanalyst. The mistake he makes is that he's taken this great canvas, and I don't say that he's limited himself to psychoanalysis at all. He's taken psychiatry, Well, psychiatry is the study of human conduct and human behavior in relation to human feelings. Psychiatry rides 4 horses to the apocalypse. There's a physical, a chemical, an emotional, and an intellectual. And he forgets the chemical. He mentions it once in a while, and he derides the laboratory. Now, I've seen a great many people who were psychiatrically treated by a fellow who pressed a button on a shock machine and got well over a severe depression, whom we could never even approach before that, even though we had the majesty of the word. The canvas, as I said before, is tremendous, but he has attempted, and to a great degree succeeded, in awakening his reader to the fact that you're not to consider yourself hopeless. If your priest has failed, or your minister has failed, or your rabbi has failed, and I say you don't have to even if your psychiatrist has failed. Maybe your lawyer will help you.
Well, may I press a button and try to get up some shock treatment here? Dr. Kopp, what do you think about that?
Well, I've been thinking about this chapter on God, for instance. Whether you put your faith in God or put it in a psychiatrist depends upon what your preconceived idea of each power is. I remember a student from Tech in Boston once telling me he didn't believe in God, and I asked, what do you believe in? He said, nothing. And I asked what department he was in at Tech. He said, I'm in physics. So I asked, well, how do you explain the laws of gravity and of acceleration, the laws of momentum and magnetism? Oh, he said, I call that the substratum of energy. Well, now, that's just a long name for the simple power that we call God. And I think the shorter name is a little easier. It's difficult to sing a hymn like, Nearer my substratum of energy to thee, or substratum of energy be with you till we meet again. This question of terminology, in other words, is unimportant. It isn't so much what you call it, it is what it is. And God is a power that we know beyond ourselves. Dr. Liebman sees it in this book. He sees it in people who are searching for that power. Are you the finest power that you know? Or is there something stronger than you are? If there is, then there is God, and that God could be claimed for our individual needs. Now, you see, I can't talk the jargon of the psychiatrist because I'm not one. All I know is people come to me in trouble, plenty of trouble. Trouble over their marriages, trouble over their families, their sons, their daughters, trouble over their vocations. And as I counsel them, this book is a tremendous help. Let me tell you, one young woman who came to me, and she said, you know, I'm reading Peace of Mind. And she said, that certainly is what I need. There are millions who stand in the same position today. And this book answers that need.
There's the signal. Time's up for the critics. Now we introduce our author of the evening, Dr. Joshua Loth Liebman.
Well, it's been very interesting hearing this discussion. I don't know what status my peace of mind is in at this moment. But I think that you've been all very kind. I haven't heard all that I'm going to hear before the evening's over. And the discussion on the basis of religion and psychoanalysis, I think, has been very helpful. I could write another chapter as a result of this discussion that I have down here.
Heaven forbid.
Well, I don't know whether you're bringing in a theological motif there. Heaven forbid.
I may if I get a chance to, but go ahead, Dr. Liebman.
We have to be careful of our terminology. Now, the discussion that has been so far did not take up the fundamental purpose that I was striving for, although it was really hinted at both by Dr. Koff and Dr. Hoffmann. I had pretty much the same experience that my good friend Dr. Koff here in Boston has had of people today in trouble and seeking the help both of religion and of psychiatry, and of the attempt on my part, quite humbly and without any pretentiousness, trying to answer Dr. Hoffmann all of the problems. I realize that there are many things here that I could not discuss, and there are aspects in the realm of psychiatry which I could not discuss, shock therapy. But to attempt to bring not pabulum, not some of the opiates sometimes brought by the people who are trying to bring help, but to try to bring honest facts and concepts that are given to us both by religion and psychiatry. Psychiatry as the means and religion as the goals, the great values, the great ends, I don't think that you can have either science or religion sufficient for the needs of man today. I think you need a synthesis of both. And I believe, as I said in the book, that just as religion has come to make its peace with Copernicus and with Darwin, I think the time is coming when religion, liberal religion in our time, is going to have to make its peace with Freud and with Freud's successors and with the psychiatrists as well as the psychoanalysts of our time.
Well, who says that they are not going to? I mean, I made a rather strong statement before about heaven forbid that you should write another chapter. Now, my point of view is, by and large, this. I neither believe nor practice the religion I was brought up in, but I do know something about its attitudes toward things, and it seems to me that you are leaving out the question of morality entirely. You feel that you can exercise these devils of morality of the mind. The word morality no longer exists. It seems to me that the advantages of psychiatry, in which I believe, of course, is that you are then able to make moral decisions. But you believe that the questions of good and evil can just be divorced by our finding out what they are. Now, I don't think you really believe that, but that's the tone of your book, Dr. Liebman, and I object to it.
Well, the important thing is how you feel toward it anyway. You know, remember
I
the story?
think thought does come in every now and then, Dr. Hoffman. We don't find it often here, but sometimes.
Oh, you'll stop thinking if I stepped on your foot. Now, I'm reminded of the story of the fellow who was asked, can you play the violin? And he said, I don't know, I never tried. I believe that the idea and that the ideal that Dr. Liebman had is very good, but I don't think that you can get peace of mind by reading a book, but I do believe you can get it by coming into contact with a personality. These gentlemen have both left that out. Reading the book alone won't do it for you, but coming in contact with a human being who impresses you at that particular time has its effect, just as a violinist must have a teacher. One more point. I also think that it will do no harm to Mr. McCaffery, under any particular circumstances, to enter a temple which he has no right to enter or which he doesn't believe in, if it enriches his experience and if it enriches his intelligence.
You give me the right to leave it. Dr. Koff.
Dr. Liebman, I yield to him.
Well, I didn't quite understand, Mr. McCaffery, the point that you made about morality. In my chapter on conscience, I began with a very basic assumption that man is committed to the moral enterprise, that there's the still small voice of conscience in every human being, and that what I object to is the perversions of conscience and the maltreatment of man by an overdeveloped conscience in Western religion. I believe that man is committed to the moral enterprise, and I'm very surprised that you found in the book a lack of distinctions, moral distinction between good and evil.
I wonder where did you find them? All of the discussion of what was technically known in my faraway youth as sin seemed to depend upon you as merely sicknesses of a person. Now, I think that you may have sicknesses in a person in which they cannot exercise free will, but then they're no longer sick. The psychiatrist, Dr. Hoffmann, has treated them. They are well, and then there is still a field which depends upon good and evil, does it?
Oh, I certainly agree with you. I believe that man is, on an adult level, can commit many sins and does commit sins for which he must make atonement and reparation and repentance. But I also believe that there are many so-called sins, in quotation marks, about which people afflict themselves needlessly, going down the years, tormenting themselves about a little peccadillo here that torments them as though they had committed some major crime against society. And I believe it is this sort of thing which has to be exorcised by religion, by a forgiving religion and an understanding science.
May I have one word?
Yes, Dr. Hoffmann.
I want to tell the good doctor that there was one word I was looking for in the book and didn't find. That was the word beauty. Now, the poet Keats said, truth is beauty, beauty truth. That's all you know, all you have to know. It's all you know and all you need to know. Now, the aesthetic is very important in life. I believe that if youth were taught to do nothing ugly, they would probably do very little wrong. So much for your moral.
Of course, then that brings in the standard of judgment by which beauty is determined. For instance, is a portrait of Rubens beautiful, and is it as beautiful as a cover on last month's comic magazine? You've got the standard of judgment to determine, and that's where I think Dr. Liebman hits the nail on the head. He shows that beauty and morality have a base in the Hebraic or in the Christian tradition. He seems to approach both of them with respect and understanding.
Now, Doctor, you know that we date the spoken
This
word.
is Dr. Hoffmann speaking. Just that so
or
many
the
doctors
written
here
word
could be admitted.
for about 5,000 or 6,000 years. Perhaps we had cuneiform writing or a little bit of a scratch in a cave 8,000 or 10,000 years ago. And we have man living 50,000 to 500,000 years. The anthropologists are not through. Where were they and what happened then? Where was God for that period of time when you think of an anthropomorphic God? Unless you take God from my standpoint, which is the desire to do good because it's in your nature to do good.
What is it that becomes good? The thing that's good is the thing that helps you find fulfillment in your life.
Come on, get back 50,000 years.
It was true then, too. The thing that was good was the thing that made his life possible, that made him live happily with his mate and with the offspring that arose. He didn't know how, but they came. The things that were good were the things that made society possible, that made people able to live together, and the same things are good today. People often ask me, what's right or wrong? Is it right or wrong because the Bible says so? Not essentially. A thing is right or wrong because of what it does to your total personality. If it's good for you, if it gives you a head start in the morning instead of a headache, it's fine. Otherwise, it may not be so good.
Well, how can you make it concrete? Those are indulging in generalities.
I can make it concrete.
I like a story of Beerbohm, if I may.
Well, just a minute. Before you may, Dr. Liebman has been making motions to me with his eyebrows for some time, and I'm sympathetic to that. Dr. Liebman.
I do possess eyebrows. I would say I'd like to, before the discussion is concluded tonight, I do not know about the time, I'd like to say just a word or two about, not on the theological or metaphysical level, exactly what I was trying to do in essence in dealing with this book. I believe that there are many people in the world, and I know them, you know them, who do not know how to love themselves well or properly. I believe that there are people who do not know how to love their neighbors properly. I think that there are many private imperialists in the world, fathers and mothers and husbands and wives, who try to occupy the territory of somebody else's soul. I tried in this work to point out some of the new discoveries as far as they're made available in our time, in a realm which Dr. Koff here and myself, and I'm sure Dr. Hoffmann, all of us dealing with human beings, meet. Namely the realm of grief, to point out to people suffering bereavement and grief that we must express as much grief as we feel and not try to repress our emotions. I try to point out that there is a psychological understanding of atheism as well as the atheist psychoanalyzing the believer in religion, and that many of our greatest difficulties with life, our pessimism and our skepticism, goes back to distortions that arise in our childhood. And from all of the distortions in childhood, the frustrations, the feelings of inferiority, the feelings of fear that overcome us as we see a great adult world, we become twisted personalities. And certainly no one has to prove today that the world is full of twisted personalities.
Well, as a twisted personality, Dr. Liebman, may I quote from your own book? Here we have a sentence that you quote from John Morley, and very well quote. Much that passes for tolerance, says John Morley, is only a pretentious form of being without settled opinions of our own or any desire to settle them. Well, now, I would turn that against you in that all of this discussion of religion has seemed to deal, as far as I can gather, with what is it good to have here. In my old-fashioned and apostate way, and I expect to hear the cock crow 3 times at any moment, I had learned way in the dim, distant past that there was something to do with heaven, with a union with God, that we were living not for what we should get here, but for, well, I can think of no other terms, once again, union with God. Now, what about that form of religion, or have I just lost touch so completely that I don't know what religion is doing these days?
Well, that's which we, by faith and faith alone, embrace, believing what we cannot prove. I want to summarize, if I may, in this way. Max Beerbohm tells a story of our antediluvian ancestors, 2 of whom, man and woman, in a cave snared a hawk. They looked down the valley and they saw a lonely traveler. His creel was empty, his hunting bag was empty. He said, what do you say we'll invite him up and give him a piece of the hawk? He said, well, take your club. He took his club, but he put it down. When he got up, he, for the first time in his life, was a host instead of having been a guest. It was in that moment that God entered his heart, and religion was born.
It's a good place to be born.
I presume, Dr. Liebman, that you are our actual host, although I am the official one, and so I'll turn it over to you on Mr. Beerbohm and the Hawk.
Well, I would in answer to your question, I'm not certain whether you really are an apostate or just for the sake of the argument tonight or masquerading in the
You should ask some people who know me, but go ahead.
Well, maybe I'll have the opportunity. At any event, just taking you on your face value, Mr. McCaffery, I would just say this, that in the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, which is basic to my tradition, the concern is about the good life here and now and the achievement of the good society, of decency and justice and righteousness upon this earth, not pie in the sky by and by. If you read the Bible, you won't find that kind of a religion there. You will find a concern about the achievement of man's partnership with God here upon this earth. That's the kind of religion, basically, in which I believe, for which I was pleading in this book. And that's why I'm so concerned there's so many bad partners with God in this world. Bad because they're unhappy and miserable. Bad because they do not know the pathway to the serene and the good life. That's why I tried to write a book, Peace of Mind.
And Christianity says the same thing, because the whole point of it is the kingdom of God is among you, or within you, as it's sometimes translated. And the whole point of Jesus was to try to get a little bit of heaven on earth instead of waiting for it all after the funeral.
And I trust that this program of The Author Meets the Critics has given our listeners as little peace of mind as Dr. Hoffmann had when he read it. In other words, none a great deal of stimulation from Peace of Mind by Joshua Loth Liebman.
Time's up. Before Mr. McCaffery tells you about next week's program, the Book of the Month Club, your host, wants to clear up a misunderstanding about its method of operation, which keeps cropping up every now and then. We find in letters received from listeners to this program that quite a few book readers have the impression that if they were members of the Book of the Month Club, they would have to take every book chosen by the club's 5 judges, one each month. Now, this is not the case and hasn't been for 20 years. If you were a member, you would get a pre-publication report fully describing the coming Book of the Month. For example, a month ago, an advance report about the July Book of the Month, Britannia Muse, was sent to club members. A complete description by John Marquand, one of the club's 5 judges. After reading this advance report each month, if you want the coming Book of the Month, you do nothing. You simply let it come to you. If you decide you don't want it, either you specify on a blank always supplied some other new book you prefer, or if you please, you can say, send me nothing next month. Actually, your only obligation as a member is to take 4 books of the month during any 12-month period. Most of those books you're likely to buy anyway. For instance, it's pretty certain that you'll not want to miss reading Marjorie Sharp's Britannia Muse. And one of the very important advantages of being a Book of the Month Club member is that this unique system keeps you from missing through oversight the particular new books you promise yourself to read. That happens to your regret pretty often, as you know. But may I repeat, in case you're one of those who have this impression, that as a club member, you don't have to take a book each and every month. You don't have to buy any particular book. Indeed, you have complete liberty of choice and are kept thoroughly advised about all the important new books so that you can really choose among them with discrimination. Now, here is Mr. McCaffery.
Next week's author of the evening will be the well-known foreign correspondent and radio commentator, Mr. Henry J. Taylor. Mr. Taylor will discuss his new book, Men and Power. If you'd like to see one of our broadcasts here at the Barbizon Plaza Radio Theater, simply drop us a line to The Author Meets the Critics, station WQXR, New York City. And now, before closing, we would like to thank Dr. Joshua Loth Liebman for coming here to discuss Peace of Mind. And thank you, Dr. Carl Heath Koff and Dr. Richard Hoffmann, for joining us. This is John K M McCaffery saying good night for The Author Meets the Critics.
The Author Meets the Critics is produced and directed by Martin Stone. Your announcer has been Alan Edwards. This is the Interstate Broadcasting Company.